Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to just take this video to talk about Legacies, more so specifically because it is the end of so much. I'm going to be talking about why I love the Vampire Diaries universe as a whole, because if you are unaware, Legacies ended last week at the time of me recording. It's actually more so a couple days ago. But really quickly, if you're unfamiliar with what Legacies is, what the whole Vampire Diaries franchise is a TV series which is actually based on books, where the Vampire Diaries originally is like, hey, there's a town of Mystic Falls where a whole bunch of supernatural stuff kind of culminates, and a high schooler named Elena crosses path with these vampire brothers, Damon and Stefan, who are both have their own complicated connections with Elena. We'll kind of leave it at that. But it's like, oh, your typical like romance. Oh, like we're both vampires, and they kind of bring a lot of chaos to her life in many shape or forms, because it starts spreading out to not only affect her but also those around her, who a lot of those people around her already had their connections to the supernatural world. They just weren't aware of it at the time. So it just kind of snowballs from there, and just like I said, Mystic Falls just ends up being this hub for so much supernatural activity. So it's a combination of some like romance, some drama, some horror elements in the supernatural world. I should also really quickly point out, when it comes to the supernatural world, for a long time it was the main three triad, the triad of supernaturals being vampires, werewolves, and witches. That's your main hub of supernaturals, and as the franchise expanded, we got more into that, but we'll talk about that potentially later. So you have that. Then you have the originals, which follows the original family, who are the Michelsons. They are the original vampires. And kind of like very like family drama-esque. Like the Michelsons have a bevy of family issues. There's a lot of distrust and paranoia, especially against Klaus, who's kind of the head of the family, but he's kind of like the sibling that every other sibling has beef with. It's just about power and control, and them having been the kind of leaving a path of blood, death, and destruction over the 1,000 years they've been around, essentially. And obviously it's kind of a spin-off to the Vampire Diaries, because the Vampire Diaries kind of sets up a lot of that mythology, and the originals kind of deep dives into that, and just kind of their struggles, their family dramas, and just personal turmoil amongst the siblings. Can they work together? Can they not? The very love-hate relationship they have with each other. And then finally you have Legacies. Legacies being, it's a spin-off, but more so than anything, it's more of a sequel. Whereas, because the Vampire Diaries and the originals basically are coexisting at the same time, with the exception of some time skips and difference in time frame and stuff like that. Those shows are kind of like side by side. Because Mystic Falls is in like Virginia, which is where most of the Vampire Diaries takes place, and the originals takes place in New Orleans. But then you have Legacies, which is actually kind of back closer to Mystic Falls. It's actually a sequel series. More so to the originals, but truth be told, it's more so like a sequel to everything Vampire Diaries and the originals. In fact, a lot of the characters where the title comes from they are the next generation of supernaturals, which also involves some children of characters. Obviously, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone that hasn't seen anything, but yeah. I think that show out of any did the greatest job of expanding the lore of like, yeah, there's way more out there than your typical supernaturals of vampires, werewolves, and witches. The other shows dabbled in other things as well, but this show really like blew the lid off of like, yo, there's way more out there. So sadly, Legacies was canceled. The other shows at the very least had their runs. Even if they got canceled, they still had proper endings. Vampire Diaries ran for 8 seasons. The originals ran for 5 seasons. And Legacies ended with 4 seasons. Like I said, its series finale just aired like a couple days ago at the time we were recording this. But I think it's such a great franchise. If you are anyone that's in that kind of young adult range of like, you enjoy it, like I said, kind of this horror, romance, drama element to it. To me, the comparison that you probably could make and could be made is Twilight. I've only ever seen the first Twilight movie. It's just because my girlfriend at the time was really into it. I never really got to Twilight. To me, Vampire Diaries is way more superior because I really latched onto that series and its characters. I mean, I followed the franchise at 3 different shows where I've only seen the first Twilight movie, so maybe that in itself kind of speaks volumes. I guess it's not as dark and as twisted as True Blood, but it middle grounds between, I think, Twilight and True Blood, but it's kind of in that somewhat vein. But nevertheless, I really enjoy this franchise. I think it's like a great franchise where you can't help but fall in love with these characters. You know, supernatural fantasy, that's kind of like my wheelhouse. That's like kind of my favorite genre. So like this show, like, hit me at like the right time, and I've just kind of followed it through since. I think I talked about this in my review of the series finale. I think Legacies might be my favorite of the shows, just because of just like the tone of that show. I think it's fun yet serious, and like I said, it does so much to expand the lore of that universe. So it is probably my favorite. Prior to that, probably the originals was my favorite. I love the Vampire Diaries, but originals, I don't know, for whatever reason, the Michelsons, like, I latched onto that family, in particular Klaus, because he's such a complicated, like, protagonist, because he's such a dick, and just the way he treats his family, the way he treats and uses and kills other people, it's kind of a dick. But like I said, I also love Legacies for it being this culmination of so much. And I probably won't make another video being like, oh, I wish there was a season 5 of Legacies. Maybe, like, you know, I've talked about my thoughts of, like, if there was a season 5, probably what could and probably would happen. But getting the ending we got, I'm like, honestly, I'm very okay with that. It's not like oh, I wish there was a season 5. I was like, the way the show ends, I'm like, actually, I'm completely satisfied with that. And I think it's a beautiful ending, not only to Legacies, but kind of wrapping up the entirety of the entire franchise. I'm sure, like, given a season 5, they probably would have wrapped everything up even in a way that probably would have felt even better. But getting what we got under the circumstances is fantastic, in my opinion. So without spoiling anything, I think they did a really good job of really wrapping things up. And the way this series ended too, left things open-ended, that it's not like everything's conclusive in the sense that there's a bringing in the next generation of the supernatural, and even younger generation of the supernaturals, and there's still so many stories out there in this universe that can be told. So even if it's out now, if the opportunity arises, they could always revisit this universe later on, if the time and opportunities present themselves to be. Like, this show could easily be rebooted in the sense of, you know, continued, you know, even if it's years down the road in certain regards. So following maybe some characters you're familiar with, but also following some that you are not familiar with, some newer characters. Beautiful, beautiful franchises all around that will make you laugh, that will make you cry, will take you by surprise. It's just so good. It just hits all the ranges of emotions when it comes to this franchise. So I think the franchise did a beautiful job captivating, you know, an audience in that regard. So just telling a really interesting story and expansive universe. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.